I guess it feels like you've been run over, and they're not just run over, you've been reversed over again.
This is The Payoff with me, Sylvia Jeffries. Christine Holgate, it is great to have you here. Thank you for giving us some of your time.
Thank you.
A lot of people would know big chunks, I think, of your professional life. But I had the opportunity to learn a bit more about you recently at a charity event going back to your teenage years. And that was a time when you literally did not have a cent to your name and you slipped into homelessness. Could you take us back to that time and explain what happened there?
Yeah. I often think today that time was probably the most formative time as me as an adult. You know, when I was 18, I sort of had too many disagreements with my father, and I found myself in Euston Station sitting on the floor with no home and no job, and probably not many prospects either. And, you know, we didn't have mobile phones in those days. And that was a very, very tough time. The beginning really are probably a tough decade for me personally. I ended up as a waitress in a burger bar when I don't eat meat. I was working 18 hours a day just to pay the rent. And I lived in a tiny bedsit. Used to, I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, but I breaking into the electric meter, because you used to put 50 pence in and turn the coin, but it was the same 50 pence going round and round, and having to lie on the floor when the electric man came round to empty the electric meter so he couldn't get in, and all of those things. And it really taught me about the importance of pride of work, but also when you have no money, how you get disadvantaged on so many different levels, and how hard it is to take it from there to go forward.
How long did that period last for you? How were you able to get yourself out of homelessness and find a roof over your head and get onto the path that's led you here?
Well, I did actually find somewhere to live, a couple of days later. I didn't have the money to put down as a deposit, and I sort of half emotionally blackmailed this poor couple in letting me live in this pretty dingy attic bedsit. It was £45 a week rent and 4 weeks rent in advance, 4 weeks deposit. I couldn't put the deposit down. But I was pretty lucky, because a few weeks in, I met an old lady called Flo Stanley, who was exactly 60 years older than me. Now, at this moment in life, I probably had a half-shaved head and a nose ring, and I was sporting the starved punk rock look. And she was the complete opposite. But she befriended me, and with her help, she said, "You cannot be a waitress." She'd been a cleaner at the BBC. And the dean of a business school from a local North London university used to go to the church she went to, and she kind of emotionally blackmailed him into giving me free tuition, but then I had no grant to live off. So I set up businesses with her, and at the end of my first year at uni, we had enough money together to put a deposit down. We bought my first flat. Now, it was also an attic flat. It was in Wood Green, a long way from Kensington, very close to Tottenham. But it was mine. It was probably the bank's, but it felt like it was mine. Interest rates were 17.5%. And I felt like I studied, walked everywhere, and worked endless hours to pay that mortgage. But it was the first big financial decision I ever made, and the best one.
When you were in that period, and you say it was foundational for you, how did that period of having absolutely nothing change your view of the world or shape your view of the world?
I think today, I've got the great privilege of, leading an organisation that employs 15,000 families, and the importance of work and the pride that work brings to family, and the importance of community. When you don't have a job and you don't have money, you learn how important that is. And you learn how you feel like a second-class citizen. It's interesting, when you've got no money, it's very hard to borrow money. So you don't get access to normal systems of money. And you become incredibly vulnerable to other people, particularly as a girl who was 18 in London, grew up in the countryside. I was naive. I just didn't want to believe I was naive. I was determined and probably a bit stubborn. But I was so fortunate that, basically with the help of this old lady, I got myself into uni and studying where probably, people were offering you jobs to be hostesses in restaurants where it just seemed like you were earning lots of money to wear a glamorous evening gown, but I'm sure it would have led to something much worse. So, look, it was a very difficult time, but it makes you realise that people with no money are good people. There's a lot of people in prison today, not because they're bad people, but because they've been in poverty. And you meet a lot of those people on the journey. And I've always had a passion for particularly people for homelessness and the dignity of having a roof over your head because of what I saw in that period of my life.
Do you think that in a way that experience with a scarcity mindset has given you a drive in life, a motivation?
Oh, most definitely. I didn't like it, but I wasn't going to pick up the phone and ask my dad for money. So
there was no safety net for you.
There was no safety net. And today, young people, they have this double-edged sword of connectivity, which exposes them in some really challenging ways, but does keep them connected in other ways. But those years ago, we didn't have all of that. So when you left, nobody knew where you were, and you weren't talking to them, and you didn't have connectivity to them. So you lost each other. And it's only probably now that I'm older, I realise that my poor mother, what she must have been going through. But you don't think of that at the time. You think about why you're leaving and wanting to go, and you've irritated people. So it changes your view on a lot of things. But you become very vulnerable. And there's a lot of people out there who don't really care for you.
So a lot of people listening to this podcast today would be very familiar probably with your Australia Post chapter. Prior to that, in the business world, you were in the headlines for your role at Blackmores, the wellness company, vitamins and so forth. That was a big period of turnaround for Blackmores. And we're jumping here quite a bit, but there's so much to unpack in your career. I want to get deep into it. At Blackmores, you oversaw a period of enormous growth. Can you break down some of those numbers for us?
Look, I would say I was one person at Blackmores. We were a whole organisation. And I had the privilege of working with Marcus Blackmore, who I'm incredibly close still and am today. When I joined Blackmores, I think our market cap was about 150 million and our revenue was about 180 million. And we had some big challenges coming along. Marcus had just taken on a lot of debt. He'd built his dream facility. No one had worked out how we were going to pay for it. And just the cost of the debt could have made us loss-making immediately. So we hadn't really grown for several years. So we needed to have a growth mindset. And we took it from there to being, a market cap of over 3 billion and over 1 billion in revenues and over 100 million in profit. And I think my most favourite day, though, was the day I announced profit share, which we used to do twice a year. It meant all employees right across the organisation in 17 countries. We gave them all 9 weeks extra pay as a one-up bonus. And it was awesome, because when you have a production line and you have warehousing, you often get people with quite diverse backgrounds, a lot from overseas, first-generation migrants, and those people could go home for the first time since they'd moved here. And I think that was just so wonderful because it really was a whole team effort what got us to those results.
What was the one big strategy that you implemented there, and how did you implement it? Because it's one thing to have a strategy, it's another thing to execute it, right? So what was the one key to that enormous growth at Blackmores?
In Australia, we're incredibly privileged to live in this country, but we are a country of 27 million people. And there's this massive world beyond our borders. And sometimes we just all compete in this little pond. And yet there's this big world out there. And for natural health, I'd lived in Hong Kong previously, and I remember once getting sick and my EA at the time taking me to a herbalist, which was very typical in Hong Kong and is in China. And yet in Australia, back in 2008, people were still seeing natural health as sort of wokey or quacky or something, and everybody competing against each other. And you can just see there's this massive opportunity just up the road in Asia. Now, the company had been in Asia for some time, but was losing money, and almost every board member but Marcus told me to close it down. And I went to him and said, no, Marcus, I think this should be where we build our people, invest, and expand our business. And expanding in Asia will give us growth, and that growth will help us actually reduce our operating costs and have operating leverage here in Australia. And so that's what we did. So it was very much, first of all, Southeast Asia, and then a China strategy that led to that growth.
So with some pretty good numbers under your belt at Blackmores, you then moved into the Australia Post role. Now, when you took on that role, you were offered half the pay of your male predecessor. Did you push back on that?
Do you know, Sylvia, I didn't push back on it. In fact, it was a lot less than half the pay. Maybe it was half the base pay.
Wow.
But I think it was probably a quarter. But it was actually less than the pay. It was less pay than the man doing my job 10 years earlier. And at the time, I took a 40% pay cut to go and do the job. And I wasn't doing it for money. And after a period of time where they'd had this huge wage scandal, not just with the previous CEO, but with the leadership team, they actually needed someone to go there and lead that business who wasn't going to be going on about their pay. And it was still a fair pay. So I didn't, but I kind of regret that. And I don't regret it because I wanted more money. It was just really, years earlier, I'd worked at JP Morgan, and my boss one day gave me a surprise bonus, which I thought was a mistake in my bank account. He forgot to tell me it was a bonus for something I'd worked on. And when I went in to see him, I was really proud. Oh my God, someone's made a mistake. He said, Christine, you've got to understand that equal pay is about respect. And I should have done it. I didn't do it at the time because it wasn't a driver for me. But it probably wasn't a great role model thing to do for other women. So if any other women are listening to this, please can you not make the same mistake? And at least look back. There was one thing not to have the same pay as Ahmed, I understood that. But to pay you less than a man 10 years earlier, that was wrong.
So what did you do when you arrived at Australia Post in terms of identifying the problems that needed to be fixed, the problems you wanted to solve, and how deep in the weeds did you get?
Well, when I'd got there, before I'd got there, the Auditor General had sort of made a complaint about the accounts, and there'd been several reports written to say that Australia Post was going to be a disaster. It was, within 3 years, it'd be losing 426 million. Lots of things had to change. They should make massive redundancies, close things down. And before I got to Australia Post, I had some time off. This is a little tip. I hope this is okay to say this. I went onto LinkedIn and I looked up people who had the job title as CEO Post Office around the world. And then I wrote to them, and the first 10 people who responded, I said, I'm coming on a trip. Can I come and see you? And I bought a round-the-world ticket for me and my mum and my 2 nephews. And I went round and met 10 other CEOs to see what they were doing about transformation change in post offices. Because, in life, every challenge you have at work, someone else has had it somewhere else. And so I wasn't the only person in the world running a post office what looked like it was going to make a loss.
So where did you go on that trip?
I went to... I'll tell you the really, really interesting ones. I went to India, went to Thailand, clearly went to the UK, went to Switzerland, went to France, went to Germany. But the most interesting one was the lady in Switzerland. And she actually became a really good friend. Suzanne Rolfe, her name was. She came out and stayed with me in Australia. Like, she was absolutely fascinating about how she approached looking at it. And then the other thing I did was, before joining, I just looked up where there were post offices. I drove a Hilux, so I got my husband to take me. We went to 117 post offices and 34 DCs before I joined. So I just knocked on the door, walked in, said who I was, said, "I'm just passing by. Can I say hello? What are your views?" Before I was influenced.
To the staff at the counter?
Staff at the counters. Before I had no idea if they were a mum and dad post office or a corporate one, or what the DC was. Was it an agent or was it our own people? But what it enabled me to do was hear before I got influenced by other management. And then when I got there, we needed to do a real deep dive into the accounts. But having done this other work, I could see that some services were really critical. So an example of that was what penultimately got me in trouble was Bank at Post. It was losing 48 million, and the government questioned that and basically said you should close it down. You can't afford to have a service that doesn't support it. But if we'd have closed it down, all these little regional communities would have lost access to cash. And if we'd have closed it down, those post offices in regional Australia are owned by mums and dads. They're not owned by Australia Post. These people have taken on debt to buy a post office. They've often sold their house. It's like mum and dad's almost retirement job together. You close it down, that would be a lot less foot traffic in their post office, another hit to their earnings. They would have faced going broke. Communities would have lost access to cash. It would have been all round very damaging. And so I come up with this idea that the banks could pay an access fee to access the post offices and then pay a fair transaction service.
Well, the banks have enough cash.
It was a fair deal because, in all honesty, the big banks paid 20 million a year. We called it a community representation fee. That went into transforming the post offices, putting security in place, transforming the IT, which was pretty chronic, and all the transaction fees, they got harmonised and they went straight to the post offices, which, as I said, 90% were mums and dads. And we improved the services. And it took a lot of negotiating. I'd encourage anyone to walk into a bank to ask for $20 more. But in respect to Matt Coman, he was the first one to sign up. And
from Commonwealth.
From Commonwealth Bank, And it was a huge success, and it literally saved the licensed post offices in those communities and saved cash, which kept, cash in regional Australia. It's how tradies operate. It's how small businesses operate.
You can't just
and
turn
instead
that
of
tap
making
off.
a loss, I think we actually turned Australia Post into the biggest financial services house. I think at one stage we were transacting over $100 billion. And I think perhaps more importantly, we won back some of the trust in those local communities.
I'm curious to know, when you rocked up in all of those post offices and distribution centres, how the staff reacted to you just turning up unannounced, and what were some of the problems they wanted you to know about?
It was interesting because Blackmores, although we started small and we ended up as a big company, we were not hierarchical at all. Marcus and I were Marcus had his lunch every day in the staff canteen, and, we're both very much part of a team. We saw ourselves part of a team. But when I got to Australia Post, clearly the management ranks started to hear that I was turning up at post offices and contacting me, suggesting I didn't do that, and I needed to, hear from them first, and that person might not be reliable. But it enabled me to hear from these people directly what they thought their issues were. And some of them were things that were just wrong. I mean, they'd had no investment in the post offices for years. The the system, the IT system they were running off was still developed on Cobalt code, okay, which is probably 30 years old. They were seen very much as the poor cousin in the organisation. And even the posties, for them, they could have somebody working here and someone working there doing exactly the same job. Starting time is 5 minutes different, but they'd earn 15% different in pay. So they'd kind of leveraged this rule about what time you started, you got paid 15% less. But it created massive infighting and disharmony.
Morale problems.
Massive labour turnover issues. So all of those things, you can't build a business. Your people are your brand. You can be the smartest person in the world, but there's only one of you. My view on leadership is developing a strategy which everybody can believe, not everybody, but the vast majority of people can believe in, have contributed to, and then they will go out and deliver it.
I mean, that's music to the ears of a lot of people as we're living in an era of cuts. Everyone's squeezing every budget, which means resources, which means people are going out the door. Do you think that a lot of people would push back in your world on that sentiment?
They would, but you have to change. If you look at our industry, it has changed dramatically in the 4 years. We've had this company 4 years, 1st of September. And 4 years ago, domestic parcels were booming off the back of COVID and everything else. Retailers have got it really tough in Australia at the moment. Domestic market is down considerably. However, inbound e-commerce into Australia is massively growing. In fact, small parcels coming in by air freight is up 43% in the last 2 years. There are companies like Temu, like Shane, like lots of them, soon to be TikTok Shop, which are growing at multitudes. I mean, Temu now is just over 2 years old and is reportedly to have over 4 billion of revenue. And you think about that and think how young it is. And then you've got an incredible brand like David Jones, which is probably 2 billion of revenue and was formed in 1838. Or even, Channel 9 or lots of big organisations have spent a long time.
Legacy companies.
And yet you've got these new companies coming in. Now, we have to adapt to say, how do we take all of our experience and assets and adapt to be able to serve this new market so that we can protect and keep our old market. But that does mean you have to get new skills, you have to change some of the people, and some of the people do end up going. But the important thing is you keep the organisation alive and healthy, and you keep it with a pathway to grow and thrive.
Now, on Australia Post, of course, a lot of people listening would be familiar with Cartier-Watch Gate, as it was known, the reason for your departure from the organisation. Before we get to how that all played out, if you're comfortable talking about it, I know it's very personal in many ways, but before we do get to that, could you explain where you had got the company, the organisation to right before that happened? What kind of shape was Australia Post in before that whole saga imploded?
Let's just put ourselves back to end of October 2020. We had just got through COVID, the worst of COVID. Now, we started COVID not knowing what was going to happen. And for our business, what happened within weeks, we were expected to double the output. Now, if you're a business with a product line of 1 million and you're going to 2 million, maybe you can cope. But if you're a business of 3 billion in parcels and overnight you're supposed to go to 6 billion in parcels to move them, that's one hell of a transformation you have to lead through. The government also made it very clear to me they weren't going to give me any money and I wasn't allowed to lose money, so I had to close down if I didn't have the cash to operate. You're employing up to 75,000 families when you think about all of those licensed post offices and regional agents. So it's a massive responsibility. Not only are you keeping all those families alive and fed, you have to serve the nation and serve retail so that doesn't die, and all these households who are at home.
Because we can't go and see each other to deliver things. The only way to get things around was through the post.
So it was an enormous effort. We got through that. There was only one other post office that I think I found that didn't lose money in that period of time, through operating through COVID. And so it was a time actually of great hope in the organisation, that we were growing profitably. There was challenges. There was lots of challenges, delivering inside COVID. If one person got sick in a DC, we had to close the whole place down, sanitize it. We opened 30 new facilities up, brand new facilities, literally in empty warehouses in 3 weeks. Can't begin to tell people, Qantas closed off most of the airline, and our freight was being carried in the belly of their planes. So we set up our own airline service in my back bedroom and basically chartered 18 aeroplanes to get us through.
Wow.
There were many things through that period of time. The bank at Post was actually exactly 1 year earlier, and that had again enabled people to have cash right through COVID, without which many families would have really, really struggled. On the signing and completing of those deals, I wanted to reward the 4 people inside the organisation who had supported me in getting them up. And it was actually the idea of one of the team who'd come from Germany, from Deutsche Post, and they said, we normally give people a watch. We probably bought them the 4 cheapest watches in Cartier. People kept writing to me saying, how did you get those watches for that price, please? Which was a funny outcome.
It was about $5,000 a watch or something, wasn't it?
I think about 4,500 each they were. But it wasn't about the price. It was about the recognition of what they'd done in a moment of time. And while some people might disagree with this, there was never any intent to offend anybody. But I do not regret for one moment for recognising the contribution from those people that they made. And if anyone's in any doubt of that, they should just go and walk into a local post office and see what the difference that deal meant. The irony is, I could have given them $150,000 each and not have to ask for anybody for permission.
In the form of a bonus.
And the chairman had signed it off.
And
but
you were within your authority to...
Totally within my authority to do it. So broke no rule whatsoever, totally within my authority. And the irony is that the very thing that saved the backbone, and, the Prime Minister's own party, his treasurer, has supported me in doing, became the thing he chose to attack.
Scott Morrison, on the floor of Parliament, when this was all bubbling up in the press, he said if she did not wish to stand aside voluntarily, quote, she can go. How did you react when you heard that? What did you take from that message from Scott Morrison?
Well, he was effectively, and it's not his job to be able to do so, by the way, he was constructively dismissing me. And the whole thing only happened on that day, actually. It all happened within about an hour and a half. Somebody asked in Senate estimates how I felt about buying them. Did I think it was a good idea? And it was a real catcher question, which happens in Senate estimates. Probably in hindsight, I think it was probably a bit more than a setup. But, it wasn't, the general public saw that and often say to me it was disgraceful. What happened in the days later was far worse.
How so?
They silence you. They tell you you're not allowed to speak to anybody, no one in the company, no customer, no employee. And if you do, they have the right to arrest you because they're going to investigate you. They threaten you with all sorts of different things. And you know what? All of a sudden you are completely, you're completely estranged from everybody you've been working with and everything else. Everything's cut off from you. And you are then, it goes back. You are very much on your own. I was extremely lucky because several good people came out straight away and said, this is nonsense, we're going to help you. One of them, a good Channel 9 person, Eddie Maguire, the president of Collingwood. But lots of others too, an amazing man called Ross Thornton, who said, I'm going to help you clear your name. You can't speak, I will speak. the community post offices, who never at the time had said it to me, but afterwards they actually campaigned Parliament for a Senate inquiry into what happened to me.
Yeah.
And they came on to Channel 9, actually, and said, please send $5 in an envelope. We'll send it to the Prime Minister to pay for the watches. We want our boss back. And they got 26,000 people to do so.
I remember that.
So it was pretty awful. You know, all sorts of things happened. They went out of the way to publicly humiliate me. You know, cartoons of a prostitute. There was all sorts of stories about she spent all this money on pot plants, trying to make you out to be Imelda Marcus. But the truth of the matter was, anyone who knew me knew I can't tell one pot plant from another. It was all made up. But they wouldn't correct the stories. In fact, they were being seeded. And probably the more people asked Scott Morrison to apologise and he'd got it wrong, the more it probably annoyed him, and it continued.
Do you think he would have been so forceful and taken the same approach if you were a man?
No.
Why not?
I would say every great job I've had has been given to me by a man. I'm married to one. I've got 2 boys I look after, so I'm not anti-white male at all. But unfortunately, he knew attacking a female CEO who just weeks before had been ranked the most powerful female in Australia in the Fin Review. He knew it would create national headlines. It was the same week Robodebt had come out and the 1.6 billion scandal. The same week that came out the 30 million purchase for the airport, which for land which was worth 3 million. And another issue was going to come the next day.
You were a helpful distraction.
It was a massive distraction. And he knew, you know, he wasn't particularly keen on women in leadership. So I think we've all seen that. I think there was a famous line that he said when, you know, they had the march to Parliament, of which many different women from different parts of society and political backgrounds supported, said not too far from here they would have been hung. So I clearly, hanging me instead, saved his own neck for a period of time. I think what it ended up doing, though, it made rational people question why he would do it.
Eventually you were exonerated, so to speak, and you were given a payout, and Australia Post as an organisation expressed regret with how it was all handled. Have you ever heard directly from Scott Morrison? Have you had any communication with him?
No. And he did go on to a television programme to say, you know, maybe in hindsight, I'd had a difficult day. You know, I didn't mean to hurt her feelings. If you ask me, that's victim blaming. But I would say, you know, John Howard, who's deeply respected Liberal leader, wrote a book and kind of gave me an apology on behalf of him, which probably meant more to me. But I'm not expecting an apology from him, because if you can't apologise at the time, it's not, apologising to me was not just apologising to me. He owes an apology to all those mum and dads who own those post offices, all the workforce he put through an incredibly difficult time just as we were going into peak. It was irresponsible and it was wrong. He put a black shadow over their brand, which is an outstanding organisation and does an enormous amount of good. And at one stage, he should just say, I'm sorry for what I did. But, you know, it tells you something about somebody when they aren't able to say sorry. I don't know about you, Sylvia, but I've made mistakes. And when I have, and I realise I have, I'm the first to try and apologise. We don't always get it right. You can't. If you're doing things and you're changing things, it's impossible. So I don't hold that against him. I hold against him is how he did it, what he did, and what he continues to do.
And this is something that comes with the evolution of a human throughout life. You know you're going to stuff up and you know you're going to fail, but how you address that failure or that mistake, should we say, is really the mark of you as a person, right?
Well, you're going to fall over, especially when you're in leadership. But how you get up again and how you treat others, I think, is really, for me, a a bigger measure of that and having some humility in that journey. And I think, I think I've become a different leader actually through that experience. It's taught me a lot about what other people go through and how other people can see things quite differently to what your intent might be.
Is there something that you wish people had asked you when you were going through all of that? Is there a different perspective that you obviously wish people probably took a different perspective on things at the time, but was there something they weren't asking you, something that they were missing in that time that may have swayed some of the narrative?
Well, I think on the day, when you hear Scott Morrison do it, there's no mention. She gave 4 watches to people who had actually negotiated 225 million investment into the post offices, the largest capital investment into the post office in the history of Australia Post, and saved those regional post offices banking services and access to cash. He doesn't say that. He makes it out that you're Imelda Marcos handing out gold watches at the height of COVID. Marie Antoinette. Yet they weren't then. They were a year earlier, after a team had worked endless weekends, their families had. They didn't get paid for working all that overtime. But giving and recognising that work was not just important for those 4 people, but for the families who'd supported them as they concluded that deal. So recognising good performance, I never want to not do that. I always want to be able to do it. But not trying to make out it was for something else was just totally wrong. And of course, when you're not allowed to speak, then it makes it extremely difficult to say anything.
When you did eventually speak, you came here to Channel 9 and you spoke to Carl Stefanovic on the Today Show. What was the response to that interview? What kind of reaction did you get to that?
I probably owe him apologies because I don't think I've ever told him. But we had an incredible response. If I said to you, post speaking in Parliament and then just doing 2 interviews, we had over 100,000 people write to me. I would not be exaggerating. And I think the more I spoke about it after that, the more familiar this story felt for other people of being wronged publicly and then being shut down. And it didn't feel so at the time, but I guess the Senate inquiry gave me an opportunity to speak publicly. A lot of people don't get that. And then they carry this wronged feeling for a long time, and it impacts them and their families in a very, very negative and difficult way. It taught me a lot about what other people do go through. And it was incredible. And Carl giving a moment to talk and ask rationally about something, I think not only was I very appreciative of, but I think it also helped many other people.
He's not all bad, Carl.
He's a sweetie, really.
He is, I know he is. He's a big teddy bear. So beyond that, I mean, it was a really intense period for you, and no one can really describe that feeling of being in the eye of a public storm of that magnitude. Do you feel like you're over it? Do you feel like you're past it? Do you still carry a bit of those or some of those feelings with you now, or have you been able to really sort of draw a line under that period and move forward?
It's an interesting question, and I wish I could answer it really directly. I guess it feels like you've been run over, and then not just run over, you've been reversed over again by the one man who you were working for through an intensely difficult time called COVID, and the whole country should look up to and respect, and he should take care of us. And I didn't just do my job at Australia Post. I co-chaired the trade board at the time for the country and carried on doing so even after what he did to me. So was I disappointed in him? Yes, I was. Do you get over that disappointment? I don't think you totally do, because it's like a car crash. But do you learn from it? And I think, yes, I have learned a lot from it, actually. You learn a lot about leadership and the type of leadership you want to be, but also what you want to work with.
So how have you carried that into Team Global Express? This is your new role now, recently appointed to Executive Chair, moving up from CEO, which was only, in June of this
That's
year,
right.
I believe, yeah. How have you carried some of those lessons and experiences into this new role?
Well, when Allegro acquired Team Global Express from Toll Group on the 1st of September, almost 4 years ago, and when me and Adrian Loader, who was the founder of Allegro, really started on this journey together, the company was in a very, very difficult position. It was, hemorrhaging cash. It had lost, we estimated, 238 million the year before. Labour turnover was 37%. I could go on. It was a huge task ahead for us. But those people had gone through a really difficult time. I had gone through a really difficult time. And I knew how important it was for me when I was silenced and all of those things to have felt heard and felt respected. And so that's what me and Adrian did initially with our employees. We made a very concerted effort we had a team meeting, because it was back being COVID, a team meeting with 145 different facilities with employees in, and we got employees to come and present to us what did they think we should do to grow, what did they think we should stop doing, and what did they want us to protect. And actually, even after 3 days, things became quite clear. And we made a commitment to them that several things were going to change immediately. And one of those things was really simple: bring home customer service to Australia and, reinvest inside the business. And we made commitments and we stood by them.
I remember when we first spoke, you spoke about, once again, going to the sales counters, going to the front office, going to meet staff on the ground where they were and asking them what they needed help with. What was one of the things that they first told you they really needed help with that would make their lives better in their day-to-day job?
It sounds really simplistic, but one of the things was, if you ever see a delivery guy, he's got a scanner in his hand. And the scanners, the IT was faulty on them, so it wasn't working. So they got criticised for not scanning. The customer service people couldn't see where the parcels were. The customer couldn't see where the freight were. The receiver didn't know. It was a circle. And there were 125 codes they had to be across with a failed delivery. It was impossible. And I think that people just felt, through lots of probably unusual decision-making, people had stopped listening to them. And so I think just by starting, by listening and making commitments what they'd asked for, and then saying, right, this is what you've told us, fix the scanners. Secondly, bring home customer service. Third, bring home credit management. Those were the three big things. We got the keys on a Wednesday. We heard that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, we made a commitment.
Was there any pushback about that spend?
No, none whatsoever. Oh, well, initially, to be honest with you, somebody did say to me at a board meeting, sensibly, of course, how much is it going to cost? And, I remember saying to them, we had 185 million in negative churn last year. We lost 238 million. What can we afford not to do this? This is what our customers are. We surveyed over 25,000 different people at the time. So it wasn't just the employees, it was the customers too. Like, at some point, you want to turn a business around, you actually have to listen to the people it impacts the most.
So growth mindset is obviously the focus for you, and this is where you're at now at this stage with Team Global Express. What's the plan? What's the strategy at this point for the company?
Well, we're in a really interesting phase. As I said earlier, domestic market is pretty tough, but we're forging new partnerships with really looking at capturing more of the inbound flow coming into Australia. There's massive growth coming in. We're partnering with overseas parcel providers like ourselves. So we've signed an agreement with SF Express, who are the third or fourth biggest parcel company in the world, so we can learn from their technology. They are a big company in China. We've formed a partnership with Emirates, where we're going to be their national hero for their Courier Express new service for here in Australia. So we're looking at those parts of the market where there is growth. It means we have to adapt and change, but that's what business needs to do, and we're pretty excited about it.
You've been so generous in sharing your story with us today, and you always are so generous and candid with your life story, and there are so many lessons to draw out of it. If you were speaking directly to our audience today, to a 20-something or a 30-something, they might not be the CEO of Australia Post or Team Global Express one day, but what would be your personal advice to them to set themselves up for a long and secure life?
I think, if I go back to that time when I was young and I had no money, when I, got a proper graduate job and started to earn a little bit of money, someone gave me some advice, which was to prepare yourself that you could always be free. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but they said, no, you don't want to become trapped into an organisation. So I had a principle which was, if I earned money, I'd spend some, I would save some, and I would invest some. And that principle I still have today. So I tried today to do it a third. But I think, if I look back from where I am now to where I was then, it's entirely different. And I'm very, very lucky and very privileged. But really, because it's come from that mindset. As I said, when I was 19 and had no grant to live off, I still saved up running a cleaning business and got my first mortgage. And so I really, really encourage women, particularly, even when you're 19, you're 20, you're 21, you're 22, to start thinking of your long-term goals, because the seeds that you plant then are going to be trees and forests later on in your life. So that's the first piece of advice. And the second piece of advice is, again, when I think back when I was, 18 and I was a waitress in a burger bar and an Indian restaurant, nobody had any kind of faith what was going to happen. There wasn't no belief in me. I didn't want that life. And I thought, damn, I'm going to work hard to get out of it. And there's been lots of moments in my life where there have been setbacks, not just Mr. Morrison. But I think if you really want something, you can be determined. You shouldn't give up on your goal. And you need to remember that sometimes setbacks are not because of you, they're because of somebody else. And you have to question yourself, do you want that other person to define who you are? Or do you want to get up and be the person you want to be? I think particularly women, we're very hard judges on ourselves, and things will happen. It might be a personal relationship. It might be something at work. It will knock their confidence. But I really encourage them, for them to think about, them to write their dreams down and keep focus on that, and don't let other people take it away from them.
That is very powerful advice indeed. And we are so grateful for your time, your generosity in being here today and sharing all of that with us, Christine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.